Well, good afternoon and welcome to Indycar's special Christmas message. My name's Gordon Ross and the Indycar is parked up today in Partick, and this will be my last broadcast before the weekend and hopefully the last broadcast before Christmas. Today's theme really has to be nostalgia, because we heard today that the British passport, the so-called Great British Passport, the blue one that we used to know and love, is being resurrected now as a part of becoming a Brexited nation. And so we can look forward to the little blue British passport coming back, the one that everybody loved so much, and it's going to be fantastic. So absolutely wonderful. And we're led to believe that having this passport back somehow makes us all more British and more proud, and generally speaking just makes everything a lot more rosy. In actual fact, makes no difference whatsoever, as you probably know. But Christmas is a time for nostalgia. Everybody tends to get a bit nostalgic at Christmas about things that happened at previous Christmases. They start to look back on the year and they start to think about what things have happened during the year. Things that did happen just in the past week, but which went largely unremarked, one of which I mentioned in the blog earlier on this morning, was the fact that the British woman who is being held in an Iranian jail at the moment on charges of espionage is shortly to be released. Apparently, news came out on various other foreign news agencies that the woman is in fact being told that in about 2 weeks' time she will be released and return to her family in the United Kingdom. All of which is a bit strange considering nothing was mentioned in the media about this. Which leads me to believe that probably what Boris Johnson said about her, the fact that she was actually training journalists, which is basically MI6 speak for recruiting other spies, is probably true, and she probably was engaged in a little bit of espionage in Iran, and this is the kind of thing that MI5 does regularly. They use people with dual nationality. So the woman's being returned, some kind of deal must have been done, and she's being returned to the bosom of her family, back with her husband and her daughter, which is wonderful news indeed. But strangely, the newspapers and the main media completely forgot to mention it. Anyway, also in the news today is the fact that the Catalan independence parties, the three of them, who have been in an alliance fighting a snap general election for the regional parliament, which was forced on them by Mr. Rajoy, the president of Spain, or is he the prime minister? I can never remember. But anyway, the guy who is basically enforcing the rules. And it looks as if Puigdemont and his friends have actually won quite a handsome victory. And so it is the independence parties which will rule the Catalan parliament. All of which shows how foolish a gamble it was for Rajoy to force another election, hoping that by imprisoning a few of the leaders that he would somehow decapitate the independence creature and that it would just quietly die away. Unfortunately, hundreds of other people have stepped into the breach, and I think independence in Catalonia is now probably more popular than ever. And so the Catalans enter the new year on a high note, knowing that they have maintained their lead, their independence support lead, and not, as the BBC characterise them, as the evil separatists. I've noticed the word separatist has been used probably about 15 times this morning by the BBC's newscasters, and this is a favourite ploy of the BBC, calling anybody who wishes to have their country back a separatist. I'm sure I would be classed as a separatist as well. Anyway, back to nostalgia. Nostalgia is a great way of looking back on things through rose-tinted glasses, and according to the British media, Britain is going to return to something like what it was before. And now, they haven't mentioned which period in history this new Brexit land will actually live in, but it looks like being somewhere between World War II and 1960. It's a time before we joined the EU, and before the economy was completely trashed by the Tories and the Labour Party and the unions between them, and before Thatcher had got a chance to wreck all of the major heavy industries in the United Kingdom. So they're going back to this glorious past, post-war, when the country was on its knees, and everybody was plucky and British and carrying on, and everything was fine. However, the problem is that no matter how plucky and British and carrying on you are, the fact is that Brexit is going to be extremely bad news for everybody, and people's jobs and livelihoods will go, homes will be lost, and we know the rest. However, the main thing is you've got a blue passport, and that should make up for everything. For my money, I think I would like Scotland to return to a previous age as well. And I'm nostalgic, really, for the 1700s, when Scotland actually ran itself, and it had an economy which was based largely on farming, and that was it. Basically, it was farming, it was wool and fishing. And Scotland had a very simple economy, and it looked after itself, and it didn't really make a great deal of money, but it survived okay. But it was a time when Scotland made its own decisions. And the decisions in Scotland were made using a system called the Three Estates. And those were the lords, the bishops, and the burghers, or in other words, the more senior figures in towns. The rest of us, incidentally, didn't get a look in. The peasants, which made up the vast majority of the Scottish population at the time, weren't allowed to vote. Hence the reason why the Union was foisted upon the majority of Scotland without any kind of democratic vote whatsoever. But if we take Scotland back to the days when it had three estates, what would the three estates be now? Well, I think the answer to that is quite simple. The three estates would be what we now call the three sectors. That would be the public sector, the private sector, and the voluntary sector. And in Scotland, these now are the modern equivalent of the three estates. But which one in the new Scotland is going to be the most important? Well, I met up with Mark McNaught, who is a doctor of political science. Now, Mark has been a writer on independence for many years. He is the son of Scottish parents, brought up in America, was raised as an American, did his university education in America, and is now teaching political science in France. And I met up with him for a chat about the future of Scotland after it votes yes and what its constitution should be. And we were talking about the issue of separating domestic banking, in other words, the banking for you and me and our bank accounts, from the international banking world, which caused the financial crisis in 2008. And he was pointing out that we really need, when we write our Scottish constitution, to protect people from the worst excesses of the gambling bankers by making sure that our savings, that's you and me and everyday people, are in high street banks, which are completely separated by law from the big banking industry, which is doing all these billion-pound deals and lending money here, there and everywhere and taking enormous risks. So this was one of the issues that we wanted to look at. So with regards to these three estates, if we're going back and being nostalgic, having three estates in the new Scotland would mean that the public sector must be the dominant estate, because that is the government of the country, elected by the people. The people have to be sovereign, so they're the centre of everything, but the people then elect a government to run the country, which they have chosen, and so that becomes the public sector, that is national government, local government providing all your services, your schools, your colleges, the National Health Service, fire and rescue, the police, and everything else that governments usually provide, including defence. So that would be, by far, if you like, the biggest sector. And it would have to be the biggest sector because it's the thing that services the human population of Scotland. At the same time as that, there obviously needs to be protection for the environment as well, and that could be written in to the public sector's remit. Then comes along the second sector, the private sector. Now, what does the private sector do? Well, its job, if you like, is to make money for the country. It's the earner, it's the thing that brings in foreign currency. So we're talking about exporters, we're talking about the whisky distillers, the weavers, the high technology companies, the bus builders, the shipyards, the electronics firms, the gaming industry, all of these things which sell abroad. And that sector needs to be secondary to the first one. Because up until now, in the rest of the world, in the United Kingdom and America, it's the corporations which run the governments. They lobby the governments, they bribe the politicians have directorships in companies and all the rest of it. And that's not something we want if we are going to be going back to the three estates. So the role of the second estate has to be to earn the money for the new Scottish state. And for that money to be spread more evenly amongst the workforce, it needs the government to say to them that they will lower corporate taxes so long as those businesses pay higher wages to their employees and hire more employees. So there's a balancing act here. By giving the employees more money, the employees spend more money, and the employees are the ones who pay the taxes. And rightly so, because they're the ones who get the services. In return for employing more people and paying them more, the people who invest in the companies get a bigger return on their money. They don't pay so much in corporation tax. So there are ways of adjusting things. But the main thing is that the people are sovereign, the government serves the people, and the government tells business how to operate. And businesses in Scotland, in the second sector, would need to be regulated so that they must be registered in Scotland, have a registered fixed office in Scotland. They must pay their taxes in Scotland. In other words, no multinationals with tax-haven bank accounts would be permitted to trade in this new country. So these are things that Mark and I were discussing over a cup of tea. So that was the second sector. The second sector's job is basically to keep the money moving in the economy, to bring money in from abroad, but also the service sector, industries like shops, like my kind of business where I'm providing a service to people, plumbers, electricians, builders, all the rest of that. Internal economy must be buzzing as well, because if people have got lots of jobs, they get more money to spend on things like home improvements, on haircuts, on driving lessons, on shopping, and so the internal economy does well too. Now that leads us from there to the third sector, the voluntary sector. Now this is an interesting one because until very recently the voluntary sector was largely ignored by governments. But if you take it as the third sector of the new Scottish state, then that new sector, that new third estate, needs to be given some protection and status. And I believe that a lot of people who have retired and now volunteer in various charities should be rewarded. So imagine if you were, say, on a state pension and you volunteered to work in your charity shop for 4 days a week. Well, I think that should be rewarded. And why not have a payment made by the state to that person for doing that work? It doesn't need to be big, but just an hourly rate for the job to top up their pension for doing that extra bit of work. Why not value people for doing these voluntary jobs? I'm not saying that people should do a voluntary job because they're getting paid, but I think it should be offered to them. Just one of several ideas. Okay, so the voluntary sector needs to be recognised as a sector. It also employs people. And I think it must be set in stone that the directors of big charities should have their salaries capped, because it's been said many times that a lot of the money that goes into charities ends up in the pockets of professional managers who are supposed to be raising funds for those charities. Now that's something that I think needs to stop. It's all very well hiring people to raise money for charities, and having good managers is important, but paying them six-figure salaries out of the charity's money is not something I would want to see our third sector doing. So I would see some new regulations coming into force, but some guarantees and some help from the government to encourage people to not only volunteer, but to keep volunteering, and to bring other people in to volunteer as well, because the voluntary sector initially was done to fill in the gaps where government had failed. In other words, where they weren't providing. So things like food banks or places where ex-service people were given help. Now those things shouldn't be needed. So the charities which are needed really need to be supported more. So those would, I think, would be the three estates of the new Scotland. So if we're going back in time to a time when you want to live in the past, that's how I would like to do it. I would like the new Scotland to have three estates in the same way as it used to have. The people will be sovereign. They will be the owners of the country, if you like. They will be the custodians of the land and the sea and the air around them. And the job of government will be to marshal the resources of the country for the good of the people and to preserve the wildlife and the environment of Scotland at the same time, because that is also a fixed asset. That's something that attracts people to come to Scotland and to stay there and to see the scenery and to observe the natural wildlife in its own habitat. So there are a number of things I think here in this sort of Christmas message about being nostalgic for the past. that allow us to introduce some modernity into this model, this nostalgic model of Scotland. England, unfortunately, and I say England because it is largely England which is driving Brexit, they're heading back to an era when the country was much poorer, and also an era when people were powerless and when they were forced by circumstances to work together. Now, that might be a good thing in some ways for people in England who've maybe not known much hardship, but I think it's going to come as a severe shock to them. When it comes to Christmas, as far as I'm concerned, because I used to be a very religious person and I used to celebrate Christmas in the typical Christian way. I would go to church, I would go to Mass, midnight Mass. And I'm not a Catholic, I'm not Protestant, I was just a practicing Christian. I'd go to church on Christmas Eve. A lot of people did that, watch night services and all the rest of that. But since that time, I've become an atheist. So how do you celebrate Christmas as an atheist? Well, you celebrate it the same way. There's nothing wrong with Christmas, I like it. A midwinter festival when the days are at their shortest is wonderful. In the old days, the pagan days and the druid days, today actually, the 22nd, if I remember correctly, 22nd of December was the turning point of the year. It was the last of the shortest nights. The short nights are finished, and the long nights finished, and the shorter nights begin. So we're coming towards summer after this point, the solstice. And this was typically a time for feasting, and this is why we celebrate Hogmanay so much in Scotland, probably more so than Christmas. But Christmas is a time when you have to look back. But I think it's also a time when we need to look forward, because if nothing else, this year has proved to me that a little TV show like this, where I'm sitting in a car talking to, at the moment, 34 of you on live screen just now, but probably several thousand of you later in the day, that a little show like this can have a tremendous impact if it's saying the right things. And what's lacking, I think, from British television, I say British television because there is no such thing as Scottish television, but what's lacking from the British television system at the moment is any programming made by the public. There is no public service broadcaster like PBS in the States where people get access and can make programs which are seen live on a mainstream channel. And so things like YouTube and Facebook give people like me the opportunity to try and fill that gap. However, I'm digressing all over the place. The Christmas message I want to give to you is this. The Catalans have proved that they are strong against Spain and that they're not going to cave in to the draconian methods of the Spanish state. They have had people imprisoned, they have had people beaten up in the street, hundreds of people injured by police brutality, trying to stamp out democracy in Spain. But they've prevailed and they've had their vote, they've been forced into it, and they have won it again. It's time now for Spain to basically stop doing what it's doing and to accept that the Catalans want to move on. And why not just negotiate with them to do it peacefully? Next year I anticipate Scotland doing the same thing in a much more peaceful way, with a new voting system, with a new currency, with a new bank, with a new investment bank, and with a whole new welfare system and a new pension system and a new everything. Scotland is going to take its power back. There's a saying, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If Brexit is about taking control back from Europe, then independence is about taking back control from Westminster and taking back control so that the people of Scotland, who have for 300 years been outnumbered 10 to 1 and unable to take any meaningful decisions or to raise any meaningful sums of money for themselves or for their own country, will be able to get that power back and vote for whoever they wish to govern them. Now, I say whoever they wish. Do not assume that independence means an SNP government. It does not. The SNP exists to make independence a possibility. Once independence is achieved, the SNP's reason for existence vanishes, and therefore the SNP will then break up into its component parts, left, right and centre, and begin to reform into new parties which will then vie for your vote in the new Scotland. This is what next year has to be about. It's the hope of voting for that new Scotland, of taking our power back. If it's good enough for England to take its power back from Brussels, then it's good enough for us to take ours back from London. And that's the way I see it. Next year will mark the start of the Scottish Spring. And I think the Scottish Spring needs to be like the Arab Spring was, a turning point for the country, a time when the people of Scotland take back control of their country. And they do it in a peaceful, democratic way, with a new voting system which is fair, which is run in Scotland, which guarantees that people know where their vote is, that it's definitely been counted, and that they can track their vote in the system and see it in real time. And also that they may change their minds leading up to the deadline of the poll. If they change their minds from yes to no or no to yes, they should be allowed to do that. And there's no reason in a 21st century contactless world that we should have to make a cross on a piece of paper with a soft pencil and put it in a metal box. I mean, we're talking Stone Age there. There's absolutely no reason why we should have to do that. A secure voting system is very easy to set up. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need a great deal of encryption. It just needs a system of guaranteed verification so that everybody's identity is clear and that nobody can vote twice, that no dead people can vote, and that nobody who isn't resident full-time in Scotland can vote. All of these things will be sorted next year. There's a consultation going on at the moment with the Scottish Government. It's a public consultation. If you go onto the Scottish Government website, you will find consultations and you'll find it listed and you can take part. Next year is going to change everything. I forecast at the beginning of 2017 that 2017 would be a terrible year. I wasn't disappointed. It has been an awful year. But 2018 is going to be the turning point. It's not going to be an easy year, but it's going to be a year where we actually get the yes vote. What happens after that depends on how the Westminster government reacts to that yes vote, because it is coming. We're preparing for it now, and all of the parts of the new Scottish state will be ready before you vote. They'll be in existence. You'll not be just hoping for things to happen. You will know that they're there ready to go. And that as soon as that yes vote is made and recorded fairly this time, no votes going down south to companies owned by Conservative Party members, no illegal tampering of votes by Conservative leaders in Scotland, just a voting system where everybody can see their vote at any time of the day, all the way up to the actual close of the polls. You will know who's winning all the way through the election with this system that I've been talking about. There will be no need for polls, because the polls exist to manipulate people's opinion. They don't exist to record it. They're there to manipulate it, and they're paid for by the press, and the press is paid for by the government. And this is why we need our own voting system in Scotland, and we will get it. Next year we will have a new secure voting system, and when we do vote this time, I guarantee you, whatever happens, be it yes or no, it will at least be a fair vote, and that's all you can ask for in a democracy. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with all of these things to think about, but the point is, as I said, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. What's good for Brexiteers is good for independence people as well. Alright, England gets its independence from Europe, we get our independence from London, we're all happy. It's going to be a terrific new year, and I hope you all have a terrific Christmas. I look forward to speaking to you in the new year, and we keep fighting, and we keep fighting until we vote yes. Have a good Christmas. Bye for now.